it is my pleasure now to introduce the very first speaker, the second speaker of this afternoon, Dr. Chantziantoniou, correct. He was born in Evia, Greece, correct, and he obtained a Bachelor of Science at the University of Manitoba, and a PhD in cytopathology, preventive and societal medicine from the University of Nebraska. He has been practicing cytopathology for 25 years or so. 40, congratulations. And he's still a serial diagnostic cytology operation manager in Doha, Qatar, as well as consultant cervical cancer screening at Cell Pathology Plus in Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada. He's a member of the editorial board of Academia Cytologica, member of scientific board, advisory board of Georgian Papanicolaou Institute in Greece, and co-author of a very nice book and Papanicolaou Revisited, the history, professional and personal of Dr. George Papanicolaou. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chantziantoniou to the podium, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I extend sincere thanks to the executive of the society, to Dr. Kurtic, Dr. Nikolaos. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor for me to be here and to share with you some thoughts that I had to quickly come up with within a 25-minute talk. So the title that I was given for this presentation is The Life of Dr. George Papanicolaou, which is not a small feat, but I will do the best I can. I considered it a mission impossible because I thought if I don't reply real quick to Danny's invitation, the laptop will self-destruct and it'll all go away. So it's an honor for me to be here, and I thank you again. Well, it's difficult to describe any person's life in 25 minutes, but imagine Dr. Papanicolaou. So all that we can do is look at glimpses of his life and his career, and I thought it would be important for us to see how they transcended into a new medical diagnostic discipline that is now called diagnostic cytopathology, and how that influenced me. I thought that's important. And if you study the matter as much as I have, you will realize that it's a saga that can be described by two words, and those words are perpetual momentum. It has never stood still. So we can start with his birthplace, which is a small picturesque town in Greece called Kimi. And to the left on the screen is his home that he grew up in as a young boy. And to the right is the backyard veranda of the museum that now has a Papanicolaou exhibit overlooking over the Aegean Ocean. And I can tell you, it's a very, very beautiful place to visit. He was born on May 13, 1883, and his death was recorded on February the 18th, 1962. He was then 78 years old. The genealogy, if you look at the family tree with his father on top, it's a very broad-based pyramid. And of course, he's the third of four siblings. And of all of them, he's the only one that did not have children. It may be interesting for you to know that this was agreed between him and his wife. It was actually requested by him such that children would not stand in the way and interfere with his dreams in biological research. His parents, to the far left, his father, of course, his mother, and you'll notice that he has characteristics of both. His father was a physician. He was a mayor of Kimi, as well as a member of parliament in Athens. His name was Nikolaos Papanicolaou. His mother, Maria Kritsouta. She was a very well-educated woman, a musician from whom Dr. Papanicolaou learned and loved to play the piano. She was very learned in classical Greek, from whom, again, you'll see later how beautiful his writings were and remain. Now, how did this young boy become the titan of a man that we now know as Dr. Papanicolaou? It's a long story, but we will do our best to put it all together in 22 minutes for you. I thought we should focus on a chapter that I'm going to call Character and Sense of Human Ability, because I think these words really characterize him and how he was and why he did what he did throughout his life. Now, at the age of 6, he came across a very difficult time because he asked his father, who was a member in parliament, if it was possible that he could meet the prime minister of Greece at the time, who was the Honorable Charilaos Trikoupis. And of course, his father made that request come true. And the premier asked him, "What are you going to be when you become a man?" Now that sort of found him by surprise, and he responded, "I don't know yet." And in fact, the response he got then was, "Well, when I was at your age, I knew this very, very well." So for him, this was a very embarrassing time at the age of 6, but it was an intersection. And in fact, it was this very event that changed his life and his thinking throughout the remaining 72 years. So, at the age of 13, he had, according to Charles Cameron in a biography, it's quoted as being saying probably the most remarkable characteristic of George Papanicolaou was his strict mental and physical self-discipline. And in fact, at the age of 13, he presented to the Greek Navy seeking to be enrolled. And his belief was that he had to conquer the power of the ocean in order to know who you are or who is yourself. Of course, he was denied entry into the Navy, but upon the matter of self-discipline, again, according to Cameron, we find him developing this trait as a young boy as he forced himself to challenge danger in order to overcome fear. Worried about his sentimentality as an expression of weakness, he was drawn to German philosophy. And in fact, later in life, although he graduated with an MD degree from the University of Athens, he never agreed to practice medicine. He was never drawn to medicine. In fact, he wanted to study German philosophy and biology. But I'm going to bring to your attention this beautiful little phrase, which is in Greek. I'm not going to spend too much time reading it, but the English translation is this: "Thy kissing you with thousands of sweet kisses, my Nina, your brother." And he emphasized his name just so that she knows who wrote that sentence and not somebody else. I find the Greek here absolutely remarkable because the language that he was writing is really not spoken anymore in our language, in our country. This was a very, very polite way of speaking, which unfortunately we don't hear very much of anymore. Now, we brought all this together with Dr. Boone in a book that was mentioned earlier, that was Papanicolaou Revisited. And in this book, we put in this phrase, and this is the exact excerpt. I'm not going to read the Greek to you, but I will read to you the translation, because his ideal was not to become wealthy, nor live with fortune. Rather, it is to work, to be proactive, to create, to do something worthy of an ethical and strong human being. And he kept his word. He stayed very, very firm and stern based on that sentiment. The next chapter we're going to focus on is what I call that he was visionary and driven. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that it was in fact the other way around. He was driven for vision, which is completely different. He had a lot of drive. He was a turbocharged man who could not really stop until he achieved what he thought was doable, achievable, and something that he would be proud of. Of course, there were immigrants to the United States in 1913, and he made his way into Cornell Medical College in 1914, just 1 year later, which is an amazing story in itself. And he was hired into the Department of Anatomy by Charles Stockard. He was an avid researcher, but it's important for you to note that he was an active member of the eugenics campaign back at that time. That's important because according to the eugenicists who believed in Lamarckian genetics, inheritance through acquired DNA is how cancer was passed on from patient to patient. So therefore, they believed that according to DNA damage, diseases like cancer are passed on to progeny. So he hired then Papanicolaou with a lot of excitement so that he can study the guinea pigs that were being intoxicated at that time to basically characterize what alcoholism is. And he asked Papanicolaou to study what they can do so that they can study chromosomal aberrations exactly at ovulation. Now that was a task. So Papanicolaou thought about this, and he then decided, well, guinea pigs are little mammals. They must have a menstrual flow of some sort, and he decided that he would take samples of those secretions, put them on a glass slide, stain them with H&E, which was the main dominant staining technique at that time, and then, of course, he looked at these images. Long story short, there were two publications in 1917, which we celebrated in the 60th anniversary in Acta Cytologica, which I wrote, which I believe were the conception of diagnostic cytopathology. Now, in 1920, realizing that this scientific discovery could perhaps be seen in women, he wanted to study secretions from women. He was not a practicing physician. He had no access to patients. So his wife stepped in and volunteered. So for 21 years, starting in 1920, he would take a daily sample from her and look at the cells in exactly the very same way. Well, he built a very solid and convincing experience, which was presented in 1928 in an article that was titled New Cancer Diagnosis. Unfortunately, that didn't go very well because that convention that he spoke in was a eugenics conference, and him not perhaps knowing that, the press picked up on this and suggested that finds new cancer detection method and cancer can be bred out and sterilization of criminals is urged in Detroit. So the press turned it all inside out, and that was not the end result that he wanted. But according to Carmichael, cancer patients being incurable needlessly occupied beds which could otherwise be used for patients with curable diseases, and in addition, the stench associated with cancer victims made hospitalization for other patients totally unpleasant. And during that era, it was the feeling among many of the general public that cancer was hereditary or of venereal origin and contagious. Therefore, hospitals generally would not admit such patients or permit surgery or therapy, and they relegated all of that treatment to private homes. So eugenics had a very, very powerful grasp on society in the latter 1920s. Well, Papanicolaou's presentation was dismissed by his peers. It was considered completely unnecessary because cervical cancer could be diagnosed through a biopsy. That was a major setback for him because he was very, very sensitive to embarrassment, and particularly for him as a new immigrant trying to make a name for himself, this happened at the worst possible time. And of course, 1928 was the beginning of the Great Depression. So things weren't looking that good. And in the bibliography of cytopathology, the next 10 years have been regarded as being the lost decade of cytopathology. Why? Because Papanicolaou stopped researching cervical cancer. But instead, he did something brilliant. And thank God that he did, because he started working with this man here, Ephraim Shore, who was then an endocrinologist in Cornell, and it was with him and because of him that he developed the Papanicolaou stain. The stain is designed to emphasize different proteins in the cytoplasm so that you can make judgments of endocrinology. Now that, of course, was one of the deciding events and factors that led to where we are today. And of course, with the image in the middle from 1917, which was black and white, he discovered a stain that would emphasize to us a variety of information that we won't get into right now. And of course, how they contrast with cervical cancer. But in the background, a disaster was happening. Cancer had become the feared disease in this country. And of course, US Congress couldn't sit back and do nothing. So in August of 1937, Congress enacted the National Cancer Act, which was perhaps one of the most important events in the development of cytopathology. Why? Because it created the National Cancer Institute. And the NCI was full of funds and money so that we could figure out what causes cancer, how to treat it, how to detect it, and how to eradicate it. Also in 1938, the person who hired him actually died, and Dr. Hinsey took over, and it was him that actually told Papanicolaou, stop wasting your time with biology and research, but instead help us help you develop a way of detecting and diagnosing cervical cancer for the prevention of the disease, which is a completely different paradigm at that time. Now, he had something that I call a beautiful sense of spatial relativity, not special, spatial. If you look at his handwriting, even modern printers today cannot print letters so beautiful, in my opinion. Beautiful margins, and of course, this is on paper that had no lines. And these are written in Greek, handwritten to his family, 1906 on the left, 1958 on the right. And if you look at some of the data tables that were actually published in the 1917 papers, look how beautiful the numbers are, and the pluses and the minuses. The printer I have cannot do anything like this. And if you look at some of the photographs that we have, here he is working at night after a long day's work. And if you look at the carpet, look at the positioning of the carpet on the floor. It's as if it's a piece of paper with margins all the way around. All of the bookshelves are in the margins. His two desks are positioned in the center of the universe, and there he is sitting and working. He had a remarkable sense of position, meaning he knew where he was based on his surroundings. That was vastly important to him to understand where he was going and how he was going to get there. And that transcended in what you're going to see with the next lecture of these beautiful photographs of cells that were actually watercolor illustrations in a 1943 publication. And look how the cells are positioned. It's as if you're looking at his letters. And that transcended into the modern textbooks that we have today. How we put pictures together to demonstrate a spectrum of cytopathology, not just to emphasize one specific aspect. And of course, this transcends into some of the modern digital technology that we're using today, that I'm working on right now, of how to put cytomorphology in beautiful galleries to demonstrate a spectrum. So his personality and his character and his habits transcended in what we have today in cytopathology. He was a very calculating and persistent individual. And I'll emphasize the word persistent, and I'm going to try to prove to you what I mean by that. Now, we do know that he was tireless. So according to Cameron, the impression which overrides all others is that of his apparently unlimited capacity to work. I have seen him seethe at prejudice, preconception, and premature judgment. Although a number of pathologists and gynecologists recognized at the outset the enormous importance of his work, he often felt frustrated by the reluctance of his profession to acknowledge the potentialities of what he was doing. He was in the company of those who were ahead of their time. Now, 1943 was a very important year in cytopathology. Of course, it was during the Second World War that this publication came out with the images that I just showed you. But that book was written for a purpose, because at that time, the profession was coming to grips with the idea that perhaps we do have a method for cervical cancer prevention if we follow what's written in this book. And of course, everything changed just 1 year later by this man, this Canadian gynecologist, James Ernest Dyer, because he developed the Eyre spatula. Remember, Papanicolaou's work was on secretions. This is a spatula. The spatula changed everything, and in fact created a lot of problems for him, because the spatula would remove cells and tissues from the cervix physically. It wasn't just secretions with cells exfoliated in the secretions. So now he realized that all of the images in 1943 on the left were already obsolete just 1 year later. And that started him thinking of how he has to change how he presents cytomorphology in the 1954 atlas that appeared 10 years later. And there's one comment that I need to make here at this point, is that the artist that made these images that you're going to hear about in the next speaker did all of the artistic work for the atlas, but he did never see it. He died before the 1954 atlas was published, which is another remarkable thing. By 1957, screening programs were already expanding throughout the United States. Acta Cytologica was founded. The death rates because of cervical cancer were already falling. And Dr. Papanicolaou and his wife Andromache retired after 44 years, never have taken a day of a holiday. Believe it or not. So if that's not tireless, I don't know what is. And I came across in 1958 an autobiography that he wrote for his work and career, and this paragraph takes the cake. I call it autobiographical chuckles. In an intensive search was thus set in motion, which lasted for approximately 2 years. So during this time, a new stain or staining procedure was tested practically every day in our laboratory, to the despair of my faithful assistants, who finally lost their patience and threatened a sit-down strike unless this nonsense stopped. It surprises me that these stains are still in use, because my work was entirely empirical, and I thought that by this time, new revolutionary methods would have been devised by cytochemists and other investigators better qualified for this work than myself. He was a very humble man, and I regard as being very, very amazing. I still have 14 minutes left, so just keep on going. The next chapter is sensitive and titanic. I chose these words specifically because, you can be titanic and sensitive at the same time. According to Dr. Cameron, when he wrote this memorial just after the death of Papanicolaou, he has said, "It has seemed to me that his career reaffirms better than any example I can think of the virtues of toil and discipline. The circumstances of his first recognition of cancer cells in secretions he was examining for another reason." Remember, he created this method to try to identify ovulation in small mammals. It was never intended for the identification of malignant cells. That's why he's saying he was examining for another reason, is a major addition to the record of happy accidents of scientific discovery. So the memory of George Papanicolaou, who has so well deserved his place among medicine's immortals. And immortal he is. He has stamps that were created and launched both in Greece and here in the United States. The image that you're looking at is actually the central city or town square of Kimi, that has a beautiful basilica church in Byzantine architecture, and right beside that is a bronze bust of Dr. Papanicolaou for people to visit. I thank you very much. I still have 12 minutes, and I purposely did that so that I can speak to you over something else before we go on to the next speaker. In 2017, my wife and I visited the town of Kimi in Greece to visit the museum that has an exhibit of Dr. Papanicolaou. That exhibit, unfortunately, was not as impressive as I wanted it to be, and that was an opportunity. It has beautiful images and photographs and some other artifacts that he had written, etc. But it became a passion for me to try to somehow develop a museum that stands up to his name. Now, the family home in which he was born is just 100 yards away. And at that time, it was being under renovations, etc. But it is my understanding that over the course of the pandemic, much of that work had been going on, and it is now presentable. And hopefully, we have now an opportunity to manage a relocation of that exhibit into his birth home. So, to try to do that, what I took on as a personal challenge is to organize a symposium, an honorary symposium, which is now scheduled for the 14th, 15th, and 16th of September of 2023. My email is before you. If anybody wishes to get information for that, just write to me and I'll write back. Hopefully, this will be a symposium for passionate people to visit, not only Greece, but Kimi, and to learn about his life and career, not to learn cytopathology as such. So it's an honorary symposium. I think it'll be a beautiful event. I think it'll be an event that will launch perhaps other events like it in the future in Greece, and many artifacts that I hope are scattered throughout the world can slowly converge and end up and be cataloged and beautifully displayed in that new museum. So whatever net proceeds we have from that symposium will go towards supporting that exhibit for Dr. Papanicolaou. I thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor for me to be here. I thank the executive. I hope I didn't tire you, but it's very difficult to describe this man in 25 minutes. I just thought that I would give you some insights that you can take with you, etc. So what we're going to do now is
First of all, are there any questions?
No questions? All right.